So hello everybody. I'm Jerome. I'm one of the co-founders of Hong Kong Marriage Equality, an NGO that was set up back in 2019. This organization, uh, there's only one focus. Basically, it is to promote and advance equal marriage in Hong Kong. So we have been around for what, 6 years? And of course, lately we have seen some major developments in Hong Kong, which I'm happy to talk a little bit more later on.
Thanks, Jerome. So let's start. Let's start and set the scene. Could you walk us through with what is happening right now? Like you said, a lot. There's a lot of seismic shifts in the work that you're doing. What is the latest legal and political developments around equal marriage, and how do these stack up against what we're seeing in other parts of Asia and the Pacific?
Thank you. So to begin with, Hong Kong does not recognize same-sex marriage or civil partnership, but over the past quite a period of time through various court cases, same-sex marriages, they are recognized in Hong Kong for specific purposes. So currently, we are talking about spousal visa, taxation, public housing, inheritance. So these are some of the things that we have won through the courts. Um, but the major development came in September 2023, so almost 2 years ago, when the Court of Final Appeal, which is the highest court in Hong Kong,
Mhm,
handed down a decision basically saying the government has a constitutional duty to recognize same-sex relationships
mhm,
via an alternative framework. So the court basically made a series of decisions. In part, it ruled that at the constitutional level, there isn't a right to same-sex marriage, but at the same time, the government has a duty to recognize same-sex relationships via an alternative framework.
mhm,
So subsequently, the court gave the government 2 years to do the job. So
mhm.
basically, it's by October 2025, the government has to implement a framework for such legal recognition.
I see.
So in early July, our government finally tabled a bill putting out a framework. So it's called the Registration of Same-Sex Partnerships Bill. It's a very basic, minimalist kind of fashion. So basically, according to the proposal, there will be a registry. So basically, same-sex couples will be able to register their relationships. But there are some major there are conditions and some issues there. First of
Mhm,
all, it's only limited to those who have already married overseas or
I
enter
see.
into
Okay.
civil partnerships.
Mhm,
So there isn't a mechanism for a pure local registration.
mhm,
When it comes to rights, it focuses on two major areas, uh, medical decision making and after death arrangements. But at the same time, the government did make it clear that those rights that have been won through the courts, uh, they will continue to implement those decisions. Some of them have been implemented already, basically. So
understood.
no, ch in a grand scheme of things, no change to that.
Got it.
So basically, the legislature is now reviewing the bill.
Mhm,
We don't know whether it will be passed because there is a very strong opposition in the legislature. So
mhm,
we'll find out hopefully soon because, as I said, first of all, the government uh, there's a court order. Basically, the government has to finish its job by the end of October,
mhm.
or by late October to be precise. At the same time, the current term of our legislature will come to an end in October as well.
Got it.
So, but right now it's in summer recess, so they will come back
Mhm.
in September, and we expect that this process will resume most likely in early October. So we'll find out soon.
Is the entire bill, like you said, is that contentious, or are there certain parts of the bill that that are sticking points for certain legislators? What do you think are like the major hurdles with the bill in its current form?
The major hurdle is the legal recognition. So for many uh, people, or at least within the legislature, uh, those who have spoken against the bill, they have strong views on
Mhm.
legal recognition.
I see.
because they are afraid, one, there is legal recognition that will eventually lead to equal marriage or same-sex marriage.
Okay.
So to them, that's a big no-no,
Mm-hmm.
and that's why they have made their voices heard in the sense that they strongly oppose the bill as it stands, and they some of them have even said that look, if we need to protect certain rights of these couples, that could be done so through other ways. Basically, they don't want to have any legal recognition.
I see.
But the court has made it clear, and the government has affirmed that to satisfy the court ruling, there
Mm,
has to be legal recognition. So this is a major sticking point.
I see. And the opposition to this bill, is it coming from a certain segment of the legislature or is it dispersed across? So, in other parts of perhaps of the world where this has been talked about, it's either the left or right or the center. Is this something that is you are seeing it across the board? And the reason I ask is this a way of, is this something that we need to think about while strategizing which lawmakers and policymakers we need to kind of have outreach to, or you see this happening across the board?
I would characterize those people as, first of all, the ultra conservatives
I see.
and the religious right.
I see.
And these religious rights, they are mostly Christians.
Now, many people may assume that the marriage equality automatically means full equality across the board, right? But does the current framework really deliver that? For example, are same-sex couples and other LGBT people actually guaranteed rights as it concerns things like adoption, inheritance, spousal benefits, or even gender legal recognition?
No, it's far from marriage equality. So,
I
as I
see.
said, it's a very basic framework. So,
Mhm,
basically, there's a framework where people can, where if passed, could
mhm.
go for registration. Couples could go for registration, subject to the overseas registration requirement.
Yeah.
And secondly, obviously, provides it focuses on two areas: making medical decisions and
Mhm,
after death arrangements. So it's nothing to do with, there's no mentioning of adoption, nothing to do with
mhm.
children, family, and certainly nothing to do with gender recognition.
So even if there's an existing couple who's married elsewhere and they come to Hong Kong, in the sense that family is not recognized, just that the marriage is recognized as being registered and put in the books in Hong Kong.
So if I could give you an example, let's
Mhm,
say if we have a couple moving to Hong Kong,
mhm.
uh, their marriage, the couple's marriage, would be recognized for specific purposes under
I
the
see.
existing various policies. First, for example, spousal visa,
I see.
taxation,
Mhm,
of course, subject to eligibility. But they don't, anyway, those are only for locals,
mhm,
public housing, and
mhm.
quite lately, inheritance.
I see.
Now, once if we have this registration system,
Mhm,
and if they registered uh, their marriage,
mhm.
then presumably they would enjoy, be entitled to certain uh, medical decision-making right. And in the if it comes to some unfortunate situations, then perhaps
Mhm.
after death arrangements. But that's a bit. I would say that's a bit.
Further down.
I would say if I could backtrack, although theoretically that's the case, but at the same time, if I go back to the bill, I think the registration really focuses on the local residents. So they're not
I see.
really targeting expats. So it also depends on the couple's residency status. So
Mhm,
I need to double check on that one, but I think the whole idea
mhm,
is there's a court ruling, the government is trying to do something,
mhm.
and then the government is approaching the issue in a very conservative manner.
This is quite unique, then you would say, to Hong Kong, and it's like really the stepping stone to kind of uh, marriage equality in its fullest and truest sense, right?
I would say it's the way we see it, it's a tiny step, but it's a step forward.
Right.
Now, of course, for my organization, it's very clear.
Mm.
We are saying the best solution is equal marriage. You look at around the world, especially in Asia.
Mm-hmm.
Right now in Asia, we have what? Thailand,
Mm-hmm.
Nepal, and Taiwan, all these three places that recognize same-sex marriage.
Mm-hmm.
No place, no places in Asia are talking about things like civil partnership or civil union.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously the best solution is marriage, equal marriage.
Right.
Now, this bill is far from equal marriage. It's
Mm-hmm.
not even civil union or civil partnership. It's, I would say it's not unfair to say it's a registration system
Mm-hmm.
plus something. But
Right.
nevertheless, I think within the community, there's a sentiment that it's a good idea to take this first step
Mm-hmm.
because it's a long game in the sense of what we are trying to achieve, and then it goes something like this. So let's focus on this one, and then hopefully we have improvements, enhancements, and hopefully
Mm-hmm.
eventually we'll get what we want.
I just want to kind of backtrack a little bit because um, I was wondering whether they at the beginning of this movement, was there any kind of um, collection of data? Did you kind of uh, present to the government that this is like a kind of uh, this is the kind of registration that you will expect if this comes to pass, right? And because I think the government would wonder whether this is worthwhile an legislative exercise to conduct in the very first place. So can you tell us a little bit about how you went around collecting that information and data?
I think over the years we have seen quite a number of research
Mm-hmm.
focusing on Hong Kong. So, for example, three universities, which two local universities in conjunction with a university in the States,
Mm-hmm.
they have been doing a public opinion survey on the issue of same-sex marriage.
I see.
So the latest number that we have, they released back in 2023. So
Mm-hmm.
60% of the population supported equal marriage.
I see.
That's a very good number. So a clear majority. And if you look at the different demographic groups, the younger ones tend to be most supportive. So
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the number. And we have internally we have conducted some research, mostly to identify why people are not ready to support equal marriage.
Okay.
So that's more for internal reference uh, for the purpose of internal reference. But it's good information as well.
Right.
I think, if you ask me, my answer is quite simple.
Mm-hmm.
As a society, I think we are ready.
Mm-hmm.
I said 60%, but it's just like with many things. Uh, when it comes to the opposition, it's still very vocal,
Mm-hmm.
very influential, and so it's not easy,
Mm-hmm.
uh, you know. But at the same time, it also depends on the government's attitude. I would say it's not unfair to characterize as uh, successive governments here have taken a very cautious and conservative approach whenever anything to comes to LGBT issues. So I think that's the sort of reality that we are seeing, which I think it's not uncommon across Asia, if you
Right.
ask me, uh, because or partly it's maybe culture, partly because of traditions, but also partly, I would say, depending on the locale,
Mm-hmm.
it has to do with history. One thing I would love to highlight is Hong Kong shares something very similar, almost exactly the same with three other Asian countries:
Mm-hmm.
Singapore, Malaysia, and India,
Mm-hmm.
because we once were a colony of Britain.
Right.
And in the early days, the colonial governments in all these places, they brought in Victorian morality. So for example, in India, they introduced the penal code, which was copied by the authorities in Singapore and Malaysia. In Hong Kong, we had something similar, actually. At that time, the colonial government
Mm-hmm.
decided to basically almost implant the exact legislation from the UK
Mm-hmm.
outlawing male homosexuality. So in Hong Kong, the good thing was we finally managed to decriminalize it in 1991. So we did it early on. So that was a good thing. But
Mm.
if you look at the sort of the common thread, you could see there's this sort of common theme going on. It's when it comes to certain attitudes towards LGBT, actually, uh, partly, introduced by the colonial,
Mm.
by outsiders, in a sense, and then eventually it sort of became uh, ingrained sort of in native culture in a sense.
I see.
So, but that's something that is worth further discussion because that intertwines with colonial history,
Mm.
religion, and also how a native culture approached the issue.
It's also, I mean, this is not only for marriage equality, but a whole bunch of social justice issues. Appealing to people's sense of fairness sometimes is a really uphill task. And I was wondering whether there is, through your studies, and that's why was referring to the studies that you have done. Is there a an economic case to be made for kind of making sure that there is marriage equality? Have you kind of, done some kind of analysis of this and kind of presented this as a kind of a way to kind of push this agenda?
We have been pushing the economic case quite hard, simply because Hong Kong as an international financial hub. So
Okay.
that has a strong resonance with lots of people.
Hmm.
You look at the numbers, you look at what Thailand is doing,
Hmm.
the value e-commerce has brought to the US, and of
Hmm.
course quite lately Thailand. So I think these things help,
Hmm.
and we have been presenting the data. We wrote something to the government, we
Hmm.
wrote something to the legislature. Through our op-eds, we help the public to understand the economic case.
Hmm.
So there's that as well. Uh, and actually, when it comes to framing, we frame it within the local context, partly the economic case, but
Hmm.
also partly the human angle. Basically, this is an issue uh, concerning human dignity.
Correct.
So I think framing is very important as to how you can generate resonance with the between the issue and the public.
One of the things that I find very interesting in how these movements have kind of um, been rolled out in the region. It's never about just litigation. It's also about building kind of alliances with the government, with the corporate sector, with other NGOs that are working on other social justice issues, but also legal professionals, international partners, and there are so many other kinds of collaborations. What has been the Hong Kong experience? How have you shaped the strategy around alliance building?
So since 2020, we have been building a sort of a business coalition. So in 2020, we
Mhm.
started a campaign called EcoLove. So the website is ecolovehk.org. So we have approached like companies, professional firms,
Mhm.
and asking them to support a statement. Basically, is about the legal recognition of same-sex relationships.
Mhm.
If they support the statement, we'll put their logos up.
I
So
see.
we have now more than 100 signatories.
Mhm.
So most are multinationals, as one can imagine.
Mhm.
I think in Hong Kong, we are still working very hard, but so far progress has been slow when it comes to attracting local businesses because local businesses tend to be very conservative
Mhm.
when it comes to social issues, especially LGBT. So, but it's an ongoing effort, and I think it's one way that we try to build an alliance and a coalition. And we have been emphasizing a lot, I think sometimes if I could go back slightly, it's one thing I should have mentioned about framing it.
Mhm.
And that also relates to how us strategizing it. Asia is such a big place. There isn't a single Asian culture. So whenever I talk about Asian culture, it's more like as a metaphor rather
Mhm.
than as referencing a single Asian culture. But obviously, within all these Asian cultures, we can find similarities, very broadly speaking. For example, we I would say we as in Asians uh, uh, generally value collectivism over individualism in a very, very general sense, for example.
Right.
But I think one thing I always encourage people to think it's go back and see like what does a particular native culture
Mm,
see the issue of sexual minorities. Of course, LGBT, these alphabets, they are most of the modern language, so to speak. But I think the important thing is if one could go back to history, go
mm,
back, have a look at the history and see whether one could find any literature that make references to sexual minorities in the old days. So especially before coming into contact with Western civilization.
mm,
For example, why I'm saying this, it's in Hong Kong. Um, our marriage law actually underwent a reform in 1971. So up till 1971, under Hong Kong laws, actually we recognize Chinese customary marriages,
I see.
which in nature it wasn't monogamous. So basically, we are talking about a husband and a wife and multiple concubines.
Understood.
That was legal until 1971.
Hmm.
So whenever people say, look, oh, you talk about marriage equality, it's against traditions. And I said, what traditions are you talking about? Are you talking about the definition of marriage? Hello, please, check your facts. The fact, as I said, is up until 1971. In Hong Kong, we recognize Chinese customary marriages.
Mm.
So that traditional argument falls apart immediately.
Right.
So it's something it's quite powerful. Although people keep saying that, but the fact is the fact, right? So sometimes it needs to keep repeating facts. So that really would help inform what strategies one should take when it comes to uh, uh, engaging people and trying to help people to understand the issue. So, for example, in India, they have a very strong culture when it comes to third gender. So that helps a little bit when it comes to the conversation. So I get these two examples really just encourage people, look at history. Obviously, we've been under the influence of Western civilization for a very long period of time, and it's not a matter of good or right. I think
Right.
it's the course of history, and certainly there are lots of good things we can learn from the West. But when it comes to our own native cultures, I think it doesn't hurt to go back and see whether you could find anything that could help to support the cause. So sometimes perhaps something good could be found, and that could help the case as well.
I want to go back to what when we spoke about barriers and obstacles, and one of the things that you didn't mention were, uh, you know, inability to reach uh, to have breakthroughs with religious groups, and perhaps what is unique perhaps about India is because, and maybe also Thailand, they are karmic, the karmic faiths, and I guess there is a uh, greater tolerance um, for these issues than say in when we talk about Abrahamic faiths, right? And you spoke about Christianity. I am wondering how has your advocacy strategy been shaped, especially if you're saying that it is the Christian right that has been really hard to kind of reach out to. How has your strategy? How did you strategize around this, and how do you kind of make sense of this?
Well, I think it depends. I mean, when it comes to Christianity, I think, we know all those arguments. It's really nothing new,
Mm,
considering, Christianity, for example, the Catholic, it basically especially the Catholics is a global church. So
mm,
those arguments are really nothing new. But I
mm,
think um, uh, the best argument that we could have, or we can have to rebut, is to
mm,
look at what's been happening around the world for almost a quarter of a century. So Netherlands was the first country legalizing same-sex marriage back
mm,
in 2001. So it's almost 25 years. So right now we have 39 places recognizing same-sex marriage. So you look at all these places, what kind of an experience we can learn from them, especially among all these places. Many of them are strong Catholic countries.
mm, mm,
Ireland, Brazil, Argentina, Cuba. You know, so look, the people just go look at the facts, the evidence. The evidence is there. So there's no effect whatsoever on freedom of religion or personal faith. So I know it's kind of silly. You look at, hey, what? almost 25 years. What's the big deal? The world had, I mean, the sky hasn't fallen down, but
Mm,
unfortunately, when it comes to issue, these arguments they keep repeating, like being used repeatedly by those people. And I think it's important to counter those arguments early on and head on because we always have to remember, I would say that within the general population, I think certainly there are people, whether they are against or they are supportive of the issue, they are very well versed or well known of the issue. But at the same time, you have people, maybe they don't care, maybe they know a little bit more. So it's important to making sure that uh, I would say that proper information is being shared widely and and I think in the end the job is about winning the hearts and minds of the movable middle. I mean, obviously, there's no point of spending time in sort of engaging the diehard naysayers. They
mm,
won't change their views. We
yeah.
know that. So I don't think it values much to spend too much time on them. But rather, I think the task is always about how we can making sure that those movable, excuse me, those movable middle could
Mhm.
come to our side. I think that's the a challenge and something that we should work on.
Right, and for an organization like the Global Equality Caucus, where we really focus on this movable middle, what can we learn from your experience of working with this particular group? Have you all kind of, maybe you can just run us through some of the activities that you have done or the kind of conversations you've had with them. Maybe there was an exposure visit, or you had, say, embassies talking to them about their own experiences in their back in their home countries. What has worked with this movable middle?
I would say in to put it in a way, it's we need a multi-pronged strategy. So
Yes.
first of all, it's locally speaking. Obviously, I think activists on the ground they know the best. I think it's not right for me here to say what should be done or
Mm,
or things that should be avoided. I think
mm,
people on the ground they know the best. But I think broadly speaking, you know, if depending of course the legal and the political system, it's first of all identify allies. Allies, I would frame it as a very
mhm,
broadly in terms of you could have people who are at least sympathetic to LGBT inclusion or equality. They may not ready at a particular point, they may not ready to say, I support marriage equality. I think that's okay. Because again, you look at the West, lots of politicians at one point in time, they were against, including like President Obama, Hillary Clinton, especially if you look at the examples in the United States, lots
mm,
of politicians at
mhm,
one point were not ready to say they support equal marriage, but eventually they turn around. So it's important to build that allyship. So if somebody at the very least is sympathetic or trying to understand LGBT equality, those people are that we should build relationships with. And then through that ongoing dialogue and exchange, hopefully that slowly and surely that people will come to understand the importance of equal marriage. So building that alliance, very broad alliance, is important, rather than focusing on one, of course, depending on the local circumstance. But at the same time, I would suggest try to build a very broad alliance. So that's point number one. Point number two is, uh, you know, uh, again, identify the level of support within the general population.
mhm,
See, and really try to identify stories. So storytelling is important. So for example, for us, we began with stories of couples. But again, eventually we would love to feature stories of allies, like so for example, parents of all those couples, or maybe friends and relatives. So it's an ongoing process, but you want to start early because
mhm,
you need to. Uh, these things do take time, but at the same time, start early. Identify, storytellers, good stories and good storytellers. And third, it's whether the government you know, it's uh, uh, it's takes some more open mind in terms of, I mean, day to day, different governments interact with each other. So, for example, within I think within this particular context, obviously, some of foreigners, let's say you in general, for
Mhm,
example, the European Union is very supportive of the issue,
mhm,
uh, likewise with Canada, Australia.
mhm,
So those diplomats could help to a certain extent, but I think my advice is again check with the local laws and sensitivities when it comes to interacting with diplomats. I mean, but that definitely that's important, and I think lastly, it's depending on if you talk about religion, because in Asia, in some Asian countries, Christianity is a growing force, so that's an area that needs to be that needs to pay that activists should pay attention to.
mhm,
But if there isn't such a case, then perhaps see whether the dominant religion is what's the view of the dominant religion. For example, in Thailand, Buddhism, it's obviously it's the dominant religion, and to the best of my knowledge, basically they have been taking a very mild stance. So I mean that also helped the situation in Thailand.
mhm,
So I think certainly Thailand offers a lot of experiences that we could learn. And I learn I don't mean just copy and paste because my belief is we think we learn globally as we try to learn from the experiences of many places. But in the end, we need to act locally in the
mhm,
sense of activists on the ground. They know the situation the best, and they need to learn, adapt, and refine to make it workable for the local context.
mhm,
So yeah, so I always say don't copy and paste because one strategy works for a particular place doesn't mean that it will work for another place. And of course, if a particular country has a strong business presence, then I think engaging the business is always a good thing because the economic case is very clear. It's all about numbers.
mhm,
So I think the economic case it's important. So again, if you look at the Thailand as an example, certainly they did look at the economic case, and because they believe, there's no secret, tourism is a major pillar of the Thai economy, and they figure out that the kind of tourism dollars would help the local economy. But of course, how to frame it is important because on the other hand, we all know that when it comes to the economic case,
mhm,
depending how to frame it, how to do it, otherwise, you don't want the issue to veer towards the
mhm.
territory of pinkwashing, which is another
Right.
tricky area. So it has to be very careful. But at the same time, the economic case, I would say, is definitely something that I would encourage activists to look into and see how it may be beneficial to their work.
I wanted to ask you another question, since we're talking about religion and people of faith, and especially in terms of Christianity, since we're talking about that in some detail. Um, uh, what is your understanding of um, uh, marriage equality from a legal perspective and marriage equality from a religious perspective? Does that kind of play into some of the conversations you've had with, I don't know how predominantly Christian Hong Kong is. Is there religious trauma? How do people want reconciliation with their faith? Is faith an important component of queer people's lives in Hong Kong if they want to make good with their faith? What does
It's a very yeah, very good question. It's very nuanced. Interestingly, because if you look at some of the very activist or very active groups that are against the issue, they
Mm,
all have Christians backgrounds.
right?
But at the same time, they don't use uh, their faith as a major reason why they oppose the issue, at least to outsiders.
Right.
So in their statements, in many of their statements, they they focus on things like potential negative effect on families,
I see.
on young children,
Mm,
on social morals.
mm,
Sometimes they talk about traditional values, but
mhm,
they seldom
mhm,
mention faith as the reason.
mhm.
But of course, there's no secret. Again, you look at their background; they are all non-Christians,
Right.
and of course, depending on the context, perhaps speaking to their own congregation, then perhaps they will highlight religion as a factor. For example, more saying, look, you look at the states that the rainbow cake controversy as an
mhm,
example why they fear it would encroach on their religious belief,
mhm,
and so things like that. And saying that even having one commentator raised that would they be forced to perform same-sex marriage, which
mhm,
of course we all know with all these places with marriage equality, that's not an issue at all.
mhm,
So it's a distraction, but at the same time, it plays into the hand of those who
mhm,
don't understand the issue well, that it could play up the fear factor.
mhm,
But of course, uh, I did notice from the written submissions made to the legislature,
mhm,
quite a number did mention that, oh, this is against the biblical teaching. So certainly there are people who are very faithful. They, of course, they believe, I believe it's a genuine belief that if we have this, that would encroach on their religious belief.
mhm,
It's their belief, but it doesn't make it right, in a sense, if you know what I'm talking about here. If I may add one more thing, I think it's in the context of equal marriage, we are talking about civil marriage. We're not talking about religious marriage. Although I know historically the two are somewhat intertwined,
mhm,
but I think it's important to help people to understand that, we are talking about a civil marriage because, again, it depends on each individual country.
mhm,
Because, for example, in some Asian countries, for example, Singapore is multi-religious, it's multicultural,
mhm,
but in certain Asian countries, you have one dominant religion. So it depends on the actual context. But my point is, if if we are talking about that there are laws providing for civil marriages, then we should talk about civil marriages, not talking about religious marriages. And we should also emphasize that you know, proper exemptions could be given to churches. Definitely I always believe that if a church doesn't want to perform same-sex marriage, it should be within their right to do so.
mhm.
This is a very, this is about respecting religious freedom. But
Right.
the point about religious freedom
Mhm,
only goes so far. It doesn't mean that if we respect
mhm,
religious freedom, then we would let a particular doctrine dictate what the policy making should look like.
mhm,
So there's a bit of fine difference. And
right.
this is an area that people sometimes don't understand very well.
Mhm,
And I think it's incumbent upon us to explain clearly as to what we meant by first of all, civil marriage and how we respect religious freedom. Because of course, each individual should have the right to practice their faith. But then the logic goes that it doesn't mean that your faith could dictate other people's faith, or for that matter, policy making. So
mhm.
it's a logical sort of question, but you
Mhm.
have to make it clear to people.
As Hong Kong now progresses towards this milestone, do you think it will change innately change the way we look at policy making for vulnerable groups, especially like LGBTI persons? Does it require us to wear a different kind of hat as we are kind of being trying to be truly inclusive of all our citizens, including those most vulnerable? What is your vision as you zoom out of this Hong Kong experience and you look at the region? How will this inform the way we kind of think about making truly inclusive laws, not only just marriage equality, but all kinds of laws regarding those who are falling through the cracks?
So again, using marriage as an example, I think, of course, there are good reasons we talk about same-sex marriage or marriage equality, but in the end, we are talking about marriage as a single system, a single institution that is open to all. We try to open up the institution.
Mm,
And during this process, it really doesn't hurt, let's for the purpose of our discussion,
mm,
opposite sex couples or heterosexual couples, it doesn't affect their rights.
mhm,
And we're trying to make the institution more inclusive.
mhm,
And again, I know people will always say, look, oh, you look at tradition,
mm,
what's the traditional definition? But again, people need to understand traditions do not set in stone. It-
mhm.
It's it's not
Constantly
about this
changing.
particular issue. On many, many issues, traditions do evolve. For
Mhm,
example, at one point, it was widely accepted that women
mm,
in the old days, women were subservient to men.
mhm.
Would we say this is okay? Certainly, that was a tradition long, long time ago. Of
Right.
course, that the answer is very clear. So I think this is something that help people to understand
Mhm,
why, when we talk about traditions are not set in stone, then at least something that they can relate to. So again, it goes back to how we make things relatable to people.
right.
So we try to make sure whatever we in our messaging that we frame it in a way that people find it easy to understand. I know in the end it's about the law, it's about legal issues, and you have certain technicalities that we have to take care of. But aside from taking proper care of technicalities, I think we need to make sure that whatever our language we use is easier for people to understand. The more people can relate to, I think the greater chance that we will be succeeding in winning supporters.
Right.
Because, for example, if we talk about human dignity, it's I think people find it easier to understand than talk about rights. If we
Mm-hmm.
talk about love, I think certainly people can find it easier to understand about responsibility and rights. Okay, so I think it's time has to be spent. I mean, time has to be spent when it comes to crafting the right messages.
Mm-hmm.
I think in Asia in general sometimes we look at each other
Mm-hmm.
and I think if we see progress in a particular place, hopefully that will influence other places as well.
Right.
For Hong Kong, I think simply we the fact that we are an international financial hub, we
Right.
draw in lots of people working in Hong Kong, not
Mm-hmm.
only from the Western world but also from
Of course.
Asia. I know I happen to know people working in Hong Kong. They're coming from, let's say, Singapore, Malaysia,
Right.
or some other parts of Asia. So hopefully, if they are able to uh, live in a place that's inclusive,
Right.
especially for LGBT plus people, then hopefully that will make their life happier and easier. And eventually they could hopefully, if they go back to their native countries, then they could, and they could share with their friends and whatnot as
Mm-hmm.
what kind, what does it mean when it comes to, social inclusion,
Mm-hmm.
and that it doesn't really hurt traditional values because those little stories do help because those stories are convincing,
Right.
So I would say don't underestimate uh, personal small stories because those are genuine. Those can be very influential.
Right.
People can say, look, because you are an activist, obviously you say so,
Mm-hmm.
which is true. But at the same time, if we have stories that could back up our work, that could even make it even more influential. So that's why I say, look, people who experience the real world, then they can at least go back and tell, hey, look, there's
Mm-hmm.
no big deal.
Right.
I've seen it firsthand. Those are the things that hopefully could change people's hearts and minds. So I think that's something that I would see there's the potential, so the benefit, so to speak. But at the same time, because if we have more Asian countries legalizing it, the better.
Right.
Because uh, sometimes in a real world, we all know that if let's say at a personal on a personal level, if we do something doing that, sometimes we say, look, should I follow suit or not, right? So I
Mm-hmm.
think for countries, somewhat similar. So let's say hopefully if we see more Asian countries,
Mm-hmm.
recognizing same-sex marriage, then hopefully that would persuade other countries to take a look at the issue. But I know, but my word of caution, it's
Mm-hmm.
uh, religion, especially in Asia, I can see for certain countries, religion is going to be a big, big part. So it takes time. I think, reflecting on what I've heard from many other activists,
Mm-hmm.
I think when it comes to the whole LGBT inclusion journey, you always, not, I should say always, but for most places, they start with decriminalization first
Right.
because sometimes you need to really take care of the stigma and discrimination.
Mm-hmm.
And once you start with decriminalization, then hopefully you can have anti-discrimination law protecting, LGBT plus people from discrimination,
Right.
depending on each country's context. And then eventually that will lead to
Mm-hmm.
marriage. But it's not a linear journey. You have all the twists and turns. But I guess it seems like uh, the start of the journey is decriminalization.
Mm-hmm.
Or if a country does not decriminalize, excuse me, does not criminalize it, then the better. But
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a journey with lots of sort of twists and turns. So I think activists should approach the issue with that in mind.
As I'm listening to you, one word that keeps popping up in my mind is that, you and the work that you do is really invested in helping poor people thrive. I mean, we can survive. We've survived pandemics, we survived stigma and discrimination, criminalization. But I think the focus here is in how do we make our communities thrive, and how do we remove those barriers to reach that, that kind of happiness, right? So I think that really comes through in the work that you're doing. um, and you spoke about people's experiences and how that can also kind of mirror what potentially the future could look like for the community. I think that's also really very important, and hopefully this happens sooner than later, and then we could all kind of bask in that collective victory. And there is going to be, I think, a ripple effect in the region. Maybe not in the same way, but definitely in other ways. That people will see more and more people together, and having families. And this is the other thing that we spoke about as a preparation for our conversation today, is that we want also family equality. We want to demonstrate that it's possible to have families and to thrive in those setups, right?
Yeah, I think one last thing I would say is, think a little bit more about social harmony in
Right.
terms of we want people to thrive no
Mm,
matter who you are. So
mm,
LGBT plus people obviously included, but we want everyone has the opportunity to thrive. And we
right.
want to live in a harmonious society in
Mm,
terms of, everybody is respected, they can live with a dignified life. I
mm,
mean, no one would argue against those things.
correct. Yeah.
So under this big umbrella, that's I was a lot of people. I encourage people to start a conversation with how we can make sure that we can achieve these two. I think everyone agree. I saw consensus,
Right.
and then in the context of, making sure that LGBT plus people that they can contribute to society,
Mm,
that they can thrive, and that they can, be a productive member of society, and that's why we want to have these policies to
mm,
help them, because you have lots of research, and one thing it's the public health angle as well.
right.
Lots of research has been done about, for example, when it comes to marriage, actually it improves the mental well-being of LGBT plus people.
Mm,
And of course the case being is, it's you don't want these people to live with unnecessary burdens. And
right.
to what benefit will we get anyway? We want to have happy neighbors, we want to have happy colleagues, relatives, so on and so forth.
Yeah.
So I think within Asian context, which of course in general I believe Asian cultures talk a lot about harmony. We
Right.
we want harmony, so
Right.
we have a shared goal. So let's talk about our shared goal. So I think these kind of framing may
Mm.
help, depending, of course, on the context as well.